I am here to talk about my book, Bicycling with Butterflies. I think the picture encapsulates maybe a little bit of tonight. It doesn't matter if you don't know what you're doing and you make a bunch of mistakes, you just gotta go try. And yes, this stuff is gonna happen, but whatever, that's how we learn, that's how we find success eventually. So on my trip, I started in Mexico, and I'll go into that, but I didn't know much about monarchs. When I started riding my book, excuse me, I didn't know anything about riding, but this is how we learn. And the monarchs, like I completely believe that the monarchs are my teachers, and they're just kind of leading the way. Before I go any further, thank you, Mark, for arranging this. Also, if the stories, you've already heard them once. So I tried to change a few of the slides so that you wouldn't be too bored. But first, I have to break everyone's heart and tell you that I like frogs more than I like butterflies. So in the summers, I study frogs. Yesterday, actually accepted another frog job that's a little more permanent. So I'm gonna have to split my time in a little differently than I have been with the monarchs and my frogs, but something that I think is super important to remember, and I think a good lesson for everyone is if you're working to protect frogs, you're protecting butterflies. If plants are your things, well, you're helping frogs and butterflies. If birds are your thing, like, it doesn't matter what we give our energy and our voice and our time and our money and our vote to, because all plants and animals, we're all connected. And so I think if at the end of this you think, butterflies are boring, not my thing, that's fine. Pick the creature, pick the plant that brings you joy, and then go give them your time. So as much as I love frogs and as much as I want to give them time on adventures, like, they make terrible traveling companions. They don't hardly move. So that's why I chose the monarch. I actually decided to ride my bike with the monarchs when I learned that their migration, like the migration as a whole, migrates in the spring about 60 miles a day. And I thought, oh my gosh, 60 miles, that's exactly how much I want to go on a bike. So it kind of seemed meant to be. Like, there's not a lot of other migrants that a cyclist could keep up with. A lot of migrants are nonstop. They go much faster, much further, and they also don't spread out. So here's a route of the monarch migration, or the range map of the monarch migration. And as you can see, pretty much everywhere in the United States, southern Canada, is colored in because the monarch is there at some point in the year. So in this map, yellow is where they spend the summer, green is where they spend the spring, orange is the fall, and then you'll notice a few blue dots. And we have blue dots out in California. That's where the western monarchs overwinter mostly. We have some blue in Florida, which are monarchs that kind of follow the eastern seaboard, get kind of confused and trapped in Florida, and typically they would just freeze to death. There would be one cold snap that would kill them. With climate change, this is becoming a different story. But of course, most of the monarchs overwinter in southern Mexico, and this is where you'll see pictures like this, where thousands and thousands of monarchs hang from the trees, and there'll be so many monarchs on one branch that the branch can actually break. And like I said, I didn't know much about monarchs before I started, but I knew I wanted to see this, and I knew this is where I wanted to start. So that's what I did. I loaded up my bike, or I took the bus. It was a 3-day bus ride to Michoacan, Mexico, and I jumped on my bike. And I spent like 6 weeks kind of exploring around, but when it was time to go, I got on my bike, and for like 1.5 miles, 2 miles, I was following monarchs. So in this picture, you'll see dozens of monarchs surrounding me. Of course, the road quickly made a left and descended down into a valley. The monarchs don't do that. The monarchs kind of follow the mountaintops. So just as quickly as I started, the monarchs ditched me. And I remember kind of just being like, oh, this is dumb. But, I told a lot of people I was going to bike to Canada. So I pulled out my map and found a route as best I could that followed the mountains, which is actually pretty hard to do. And so following the monarchs in Mexico was quite a bit harder. Here's my route. In Mexico, you'll see my northern route was a bit, because there's no road that follows a mountain range. They all are passes that go up and over. So on my spring route, my northern route, I was a little bit more west of the Sierra Madre Mountains, and on the fall migration route, I was a little bit more west, and I saw way more east. I saw way more monarchs on my fall route. I think the route that I chose in the spring was a little too much in the desert, but I did see a few, and it blew my mind every time I saw a monarch on my ride, and every one that I saw was like, okay, phew, okay, even if I just see two, I'll at least have seen a few on my ride. Like, that was what I was most scared about, was like doing this whole thing and not seeing a monarch. Now, the rest of my route, when I left, I didn't have much of a plan at all. I knew I was going to follow the Sierra Madre Mountains as best I could in Mexico, make it to Canada, visit my parents in Kansas City for a shower and a meal. And otherwise, I didn't have any plans. But what was cool is I started contacting teachers and asking, hey, can I come to your school and talk to your students about monarchs and conservation and science and adventure? And they'd say yes, and then a news reporter would find out about my trip, and then they'd do an article in the newspaper or an interview, and slowly my message started to grow beyond just the actual route that I was on, and I started getting invitations to do presentations and meet people that were fighting to protect the monarch, and I tried to say yes as much as possible. My trip by myself, I would have been able to talk to hundreds of people, but if I could accept the invitation from someone like Mark, who was able to put in the time and the energy to wrangle all of you all here tonight, well, then my voice would be much louder. And I needed people to do the hard work of getting the presentations organized and contacting the media. And so it was in my best interest and the monarch's interest to go where the passion was. And so you'll see lots of wiggles in my route. That's all just from one invitation or the other. Now this red line, my route ended up being 10,201 miles long, and it took me about 8.5 months. So I started in March 12th and finished November 30th, which in November 30th is like, I was with the stragglers. Like, they usually start arriving around November 2nd. I was here this year. I did a little book tour from Kansas City to here in Mexico on my motorcycle, and I raced from the border to where the monarchs overwinter. I passed in 1.5 days on my motorcycle, got here October 26th, and exactly on time, November 2nd, I saw my first monarch, which is just so extraordinary. And like, I have told thousands and thousands of people about monarchs, but there's still these moments that I have where I'll see a monarch and they still can blow my mind. Like, the fact that a monarch can fly from Canada and arrive on November 2nd, the exact day, is so amazing. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself, because I want to kind of go over a quick overview of the monarch migration. And to do that, I'm going to back up, and I'm going to tell you with absolute certainty that the monarchs that I started with, 100%, no questions, died before I finished my trip. And I think this is one of the other astounding things about the migration, is that the monarchs that start are not the ones that finish. So it's a multi-generational migration. So the monarchs will fly to Texas and Oklahoma, the southern part of their range. This is kind of the Green Spring area. They lay their eggs and they die. Those eggs become the first generation, which metamorphose, fly north, lay their eggs, and die. And it takes about 3 to 5 generations to complete the migration. So when I was in Indiana, biking down the side of the road, and I saw a little egg on some milkweed, I was seeing the not the parent, not the grandparent, but possibly the great grandparent or possibly the great 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 grandparent of the butterflies that I started with. And that's, I mean, if that doesn't blow your mind, no, you should just sign out because that's so amazing, so amazing. I did my trip on this bike here. It's an old 1989 Specialized Hard Rock. The panniers are the bags in the front that held what I considered my office and my bedroom. So computer, sleeping bag, sleeping pad, journal, headlamp, that sort of stuff. These rear panniers, they're actually repurposed kitty litter buckets. And then on the top there is my tent and a little camp chair. And in these panniers, that was basically my office, or excuse me, my workshop, my kitchen. I usually, well, actually, I'll just fast forward. Here's everything I carried. So in these rear panniers, I have got tools, about 1 day worth of food, cooking gear, my tent, my rain gear, and then this bag is like a super high-tech pillow. During the day, it holds my pajamas, and at night, it holds my riding outfit. And when it's got my riding outfit in it, it makes a wonderful pillow. So you got to like find ways to use the space wisely and not carry more than you need. My bike was so heavy. I went so slow, but you know, realistically, you don't need to be it very fast to cover a lot of miles if you start and just keep going in 1 day. I typically went about 60 miles a day, which is, I think, on the low end for most cycle tourists. But I had a lot I wanted to do, and there was a lot I wanted to see and stop and visit. So that's actually what I love most about bike touring, especially when you're carrying all your bags on your bike, is that you just have absolute freedom. Like I didn't need a plan. I didn't need to know where I was going to stop every night because I had everything I needed. So like when I was hungry, I would just pull over somewhere and have a snack or cook a meal. And when I was tired, I'd start looking for a place to pitch my tent. And I never once in 8.5 months paid to camp. My friends and I will call this stealth camping, where you kind of camp in plain sight. And this is a perfect example of my camping. So there's a road in Texas, the highway in Texas, and there's my tent. And people always freak out when they hear that I'm doing this. And like, sometimes people like physically try and stop me. They're like, no, you're gonna die. And I was like, I've been doing this for 10 years. It's okay. But I actually feel way safer camping this way because no one is expecting me there. And so it actually feels safer to me than a campground because no one's like, let's go 10 miles out of town and see if someone's camping for the first time in recent memory behind that shrub. Like they're just not going to do that. If they want to go be mischievous, they're going to go to a campground. The other reason that I really love this way of camping is because this is what the monarchs do, right? They can't get out a map and like find the public land or find the specific houses that have put out milkweed. Like they just go where they go, and at night they either find what they need or they don't. And so we have the opportunity to make sure that if they land in our yard, they have what they need. And yeah, I'll talk about that more later. I'm very distracted. There's a very loud car outside playing very loud music. The other reason that I love bike touring is because I'm going the perfect speed that it's not too fast, not too cold, not too cold, not too fast, not too slow. And because it's just fast enough that I don't feel like 10 miles is like forever away, but also I'm going slow enough that when I see a little toadlet cross the road, I could stop and say hi. On my motorcycle tour, I had every intention of stopping and looking at wildlife, and it was just so much harder because you're going faster, and when you see that spot, you've got to find a safe spot to pull over, and by the time you find that spot, the moment's kind of literally passed, and you're like, I'll stop at the next one. So on my motorcycle, I loved a lot. I loved not being tired and not dealing with traffic as much, but I missed the opportunities that I literally passed by. Now, I love frogs, as I've mentioned. I do love butterflies too. But my trip was about more than just butterflies. So I was obviously looking for monarchs, but I was interested in any animal I ran across. And the toad here takes the prize for cutest animal of the trip. I truly believe that this animal here wins most beautiful award. This is a rough green snake, completely harmless and so beautiful. Like this snake looks like it belongs in like the Amazon, like, or some tropical place. But these animals live in the Midwest and they're completely harmless, but we're so scared of them. And I think about I compare these snakes to wild yards. We are so scared of anything that looks wild. And we've got to rethink our feelings about weedy lawns or wild places or snakes, because they're only scary because we don't notice them, or we don't pay attention, and we don't take the time to learn about them. But I've trained my brain to see beauty in snakes. I've trained my brain to see a perfectly manicured lawn as just a complete waste and, quite frankly, ugly. Whereas I see a wild landscaped lawn or yard, I should say, with lots of wildflowers and maybe a sign and a more messy look, and I see that as beautiful. And that's, I think, what the snake inspires in me. Scariest encounter of the trip, this skunk. Don't worry, we were both okay. Most annoying encounter of the trip, I say this jokingly, was 100% humans. Like, I'm an introvert. I just want to get left alone. I actually had to write on a little note that I taped to my handlebars, like, 2 things. One was, it's easier to be nice, and 2, do it for the monarchs. So every time someone would stop me, I'd try and take a deep breath and be like, just give them 10 minutes of your time. Like, you're not in a rush. The point is literally to talk to people about monarchs. But it wasn't always easy. Luckily, it often paid off in many different ways, including this encounter. This man stopped on his motorcycle on the most boring, hottest road in Mexico. And my initial reaction was, I'm just gonna ignore him, which is like hilarious because it's like very obvious when you're on a long, quiet, boring road in Mexico that there's a motorcycle stopped in front of you. But I stopped for the monarchs, and we were chatting about monarchs, and then he's like, hey, do you want some ice cream? And his cooler is full of ice cream. And so I said yes. And this is just like one of thousands of examples of people seeing me and stopping and sharing an experience. And I don't remember the mile before or after this, but I remember this man. And I think I'm grateful that I put myself in that situation, and I'm grateful I stopped, and I'm grateful that he took a chance on me too, because it's scary to stop and talk to a stranger. Now, it wasn't just roadside ice cream. I was invited and stayed with, well, many more invitations, but I ended up staying with 68 families on my trip, and most of them were strangers to start. Some are still strangers, which I find hilarious. Like in Austin, I pet sat at someone's house. Like, they needed a pet sitter and I needed a place to stay, and I never met them. But this is Margaret, and she's a dairy farmer in Canada. And she invited me to her house I think she found out about me through a friend of a friend. And of course I said yes. And I said yes to the homemade chocolate ice cream. It was amazing. But I included this photo because Margaret's feeding me in the foreground, and in the background, she's feeding pollinators. And so again, my trip was about more than just like being in the same area as a monarch, but it was like literally about feeling what it feels like to get hospitality. And if we can think of our yards as opportunities to be hosts and to give the monarchs the hospitality that they deserve, and all the pollinators, of course. So the monarchs need these plants in their yards for food, for shelter, and we have a choice. We can either invite them to our yards, or we can continue to plant grass and mow it and weed it and spray it with chemicals. And for me, the answer is obvious. Now, I was doing this presentation, and this was on my bike tour. Someone, I forget the moment, but she was so worried that I hadn't gotten an invitation for ice cream in the US because because I'd only talked about ice cream in Mexico and Canada. I'm like, no, I've gotten way too much ice cream. I've eaten way too much ice cream. But this is my favorite US ice cream story. This is Lynn and Erica, and I met them in Mexico. They were tourists just like me, traveling to see the monarchs, and they said, oh, we're from New York. And I said, I'm gonna bike to New York. And they were like, sure you are, here's our number. You know, I don't know if they believed me, but of course, fast forward 4 months and I call up Erica and I'm like, where's your apartment? I'm coming. And then, so I stayed with Erica for, I don't remember, 3 or 4 nights. And then Lynn took us out for lunch. And afterwards, she's like, we got to get ice cream and a fish. And I'm like, that sounds disgusting. But you can see here, I'm actually quite happy. This is a stolen internet photo, but this is what she was talking about. It's this Japanese craze, and it's like a soft shell ice cream with like sesame and ice cream. It was really, really, really wonderful and beautiful. And again, like this is a moment that I have only because of invitation, only because I like kind of put myself out there and went where the opportunity went, or led me, I should say. So I'm an ice cream person, if you can't tell that already. Monarchs, however, aren't. They don't need ice cream. They just need milkweed. And I spent 10,000 miles looking for ice cream and looking for ice cream. I'm sorry, looking for milkweed. And I got really, really good at spotting milkweed from the side of the road. So here is me literally jumping off my bike to inspect this milkweed. Now I'm gonna zoom in, because on this milkweed, I sat in the ditch for like, I would guess at least an hour watching this caterpillar. And they were doing the coolest thing. They were grabbing their frass, which are these little green nuggets, which are their poo, but we call it frass because we need a name for everything in science. And they were grabbing their frass and throwing it over the leaf. And my theory is, when I was biking, I noticed I didn't spot the caterpillar. What I spotted first was the frass. And as soon as I saw the frass, I thought, oh, I bet there's a big caterpillar on that milkweed, and I stopped. And of course there was. And so my guess is that this caterpillar is trying to just clear the evidence that they're there by cleaning the leaf that they're eating. The other really cool thing that's happening in this picture is that this 5th instar caterpillar, you'll notice all the other leaves are kind of like angled up, and the leaf that they're on is angled down. That's because they chewed the stem of this milkweed leaf. And what that did is it cut the flow of the milky latex. And milkweed gets its name because most species, and there's over 70 in North America that are native to North America, but if you tear a leaf, this milky sap of most species produce this milky sap. And that sap is really sticky and will actually glue shut the mouths of young caterpillars. So young caterpillars will often like chew a trench in the leaf, let the milky latex drain out, and then they'll eat kind of like the middle area to avoid that glue. And these 5th instar caterpillars will just chew the vein so that it will stop that flow of milky latex to their meal. So cool. So cool. The other thing I want to add about milkweed, because I'm kind of jumping all over, is that the caterpillars, as they eat the milkweed, it's not only a milky sap, but it's actually toxic. And they can store that venom, or that poison, in their body, which is why a monarch adult is orange. They're warning predators that they're toxic because they ate toxic milkweed as caterpillars. So there's like really incredible science happening here. And I'm just going to back up. It's happening 1 foot away from this random highway in Indiana. And man, it's such a lesson. Like, we don't have to travel to Africa or go to a zoo or go to a national park to find really incredible creatures. We just have to stop and notice the ones that are in our own yards, on our own sides of the road. And the more I stopped, the more I looked, the more I fell in love with all these creatures. The problem with that is then I spent 10,000 miles seeing this. seeing the loss that the monarchs are suffering because we are taking their habitat, because we are mowing down the last refuge a lot of monarchs have. In the Corn Belt in the upper Midwest, where the monarchs used to be the most concentrated, most of that land has been converted to corn, and now it's genetically modified corn that can be sprayed with herbicides so that the milkweed can't even grow in between the corn rows. And so the last refuge is the side of the road, and we can't even give the monarchs that. And I spent 10,000 miles. Well, not the first. I said the first 3,000 were like, yeah, this is fun. The next probably 7,000 miles or 6,000 miles of my trip, I was just so mad because I was looking at the world through the lens of a monarch, and what I saw was horrifying, and I got really, really mad, and it was everywhere, at our schools, and at our houses, and our farms. And I know, like, most of the people are well-intentioned. They're mowing their lawns and they're making them, quote, pretty, because that's what good neighbors do. But we have got to be good neighbors to more than just humans. And in these pictures, we are not being good neighbors to our monarch neighbors, to our frog neighbors, to our plant neighbors, to our bird neighbors, if I already said that. We're just not being good neighbors. And every step that you all take today, every photo that I show, that was all monarch land. We stole it. We stole all of their land. That's their home. And that's not okay. And we have to start taking responsibility for that. And we have to start seeing the potential of our yards to be the difference between the monarchs having a future or not, which means sharing. So yes, we can have a little bit of lawn, but we don't need these big, big lawns. Like, most of these lawns aren't used for anything, but they can be used by the monarchs and other pollinators and birds and frogs and all of that. And so what we need to do is start returning this land to native. We can start small and we can add each year, but we need to share. Because this is the reality. Monarchs are counted in Mexico in December. They don't count the number of monarchs, they count the space they take up. This graph happens to be in hectares, which 1 hectare is about 2.4 acres, I want to say. You'll notice over the last 20 years, there's been a dramatic decline. And Dr. Chip Taylor of Monarch Watch guesses that it might be the lowest number on record this winter, but we'll see. You'll see that there's ups and downs. The important thing to notice, though, is that downward trend. And you'll also notice this green line, this green dotted line. This is where scientists believe the population would be sustainable, where if there was a fluke storm, like has happened in recent memory, that kills 80% of the monarchs living in Mexico during a winter storm, there'd still be enough monarchs left to repopulate their spring and summer range and rebound. They can rebound remarkably fast because a female will lay 400 eggs. Only a few of those will survive, but if 4 survive, that doubles the population. And if there's 5 generations and each generation doubles, well, you can begin to see how quickly they can rebound. The problem is a female needs 400 milkweeds to lay 400 eggs in order for 4 of those to stand a chance. The other issue is if we have a perfect corridor with billions and billions of milkweeds, well, that won't work if one spring they're all blown more east and they're not in that corridor. So in order to reach this green sustainable line, scientists say we need to plant 1.8 billion stems of milkweed, and we need to plant them across their range. That way there'll be enough, no matter where they end up, there'll be enough opportunity to lay those eggs. Some of those eggs will survive because they had the opportunity. If there's not enough milkweed, the females will do this thing called egg dumping, where they'll put a lot of eggs on one milkweed, and then the caterpillars will eat quicker than the milkweed can grow. So plant that milkweed, get the milkweed in the ground, starting now. Right now is the perfect time. Milkweed seeds need to undergo winter, or it's called cold stratification. So you can literally just put some seeds in a little planter box, put it outside, let it get cold, let the rain and the snow come, And in the spring, they'll pop up in that planter box. You'll know they're milkweeds because you put them in little planter boxes, and then you can put them around your yard. Start literally today, tomorrow. It's your homework. Now, you can probably tell I'm getting all and it was a constant struggle. And for me, my book has become this my journey between figuring out how to deal with my hope and my anger. And we need both. But where I find hope is by doing something. And I don't care what you're doing. I don't care even if it's not really working. If you're trying is contagious. Trying, it sets the mind frame that we all should be trying. And so anything to help. If you're an artist, paint the monarchs. If you're a teacher, teach about the monarchs. Everyone has a role to play in this fight. It's a fight. And so do something. For me, it's be the monarch's voice. Tell as many people as I can about the monarch and how we need to plant milkweed and nectar plants. The other way I cope is to surround myself with other people that care. So I toured so many cool school gardens. It was so incredible. If you have the time and the energy, get a native butterfly garden going at a school near you. It'll pay off in many ways. And by meeting scientists, this is Dr. Chip Taylor. He's in his 80s in this photo, and he's been fighting for the monarchs for over 30 years. And if that doesn't inspire you, I don't think anything will. But that's a monarch, by the way, on his face. But he's a true inspiration. I was also inspired by farmers. This is the Native American seed farm in Junction, Texas, family/team. And Bill gave me a tour of his farm, and he started his career planting non-natives as a landscaper, and during a drought realized, oh, this is not working. We live in Texas. And he started learning about natives, and now he grows native plants, harvests the seeds, and sells the seeds to other folks that want to grow native. And another truly inspiring family. I was inspired by this golf course. The native prairie is the rough. They don't have to water anymore. They don't have to mow at least as much, and you can still golf. So again, it's not one or the other. It's about finding ways that we can share. Here's a garden in a parking lot. If monarchs can live in a parking lot, they can live anywhere. And of course, there's our backyards. This is a small little garden that's still, even though it's small, it matters. Because when I visited this garden in Oklahoma, there were already 40 eggs laid on this plant. If just one of those survives, that could be 400 in the next generation, 400 eggs, which could be thousands of eggs by the end of the summer. And so every garden matters. And this garden too is just such a good example of sharing. We don't have to get rid of the patio. I'm not asking you to get rid of every square inch of grass or the ornamentals that you love. It's about sharing. It's about starting to add native nectar plants, which are just native plants that flower, and milkweed to your yard. Don't stop at the backyard. We have to change what beautiful means. And the way we change what beautiful means is to be the example of another way, like Nadia in this picture is doing. Her front yard was so amazing. I mean, it was such a breath of fresh air. And what I loved most was that in her neighbor's yard, there was milkweed, because her neighbors learned that if there was no milkweed, which is the only food source of the monarch caterpillar, then there can be no monarchs. So now they mow around this little clump of milkweed. The only reason this milkweed exists is because Nadia was that example. The only reason maybe one of you saw a monarch this year is because Nadia in her garden when I was visiting had at least 10 caterpillars, and maybe one of those survived and is the reason you all saw a monarch last fall. Like, everyone is connected and we need these examples. Here's another example. This is like a 50-50 garden, which I think is really beautiful. And the way in this photo, proof that if you plant natives, the monarchs will come. And she also does, this is Val in Missouri, she also does a really good job. She mowed a really distinct border around her garden, which really just like showed her neighborhood that what it is to like see the example of, sorry, I got distracted again. I'm just gonna keep going. I visited Val on my motorcycle tour, and it was in a drought. There was a terrible drought this year, but despite that, we were looking around her milkweeds, and we found two chrysalises that had two monarchs that had just eclosed from their chrysalis, and they were hanging out, drying their wings, getting ready to fly to Mexico. And like, I just want to say it again, this monarch exists only because Val made a choice to share her yard. That is so amazing. And like, this monarch might come back and visit someone in Texas, and the only reason that person will see that monarch is because of Val. Like, we're all connected by monarchs, and we all need to take responsibility and make sure that they find what they need when they arrive at our houses. There's no excuse. I crossed the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, got to Manhattan, took a picture, or saw this butterfly, chased this butterfly, probably looked like a very wild person, and managed to take a picture of this butterfly. And I was so excited because it's like proof. If a butterfly can survive New York City, they can survive anywhere. And before I'm gonna just kind of skip through this a little bit, since since I gave you a tour of Angengao. What I'm asking about sharing, it's not a one-way street. Like, it's not just giving. We're also gonna, or we receive a lot from giving to the monarchs. We receive beauty. Like, these animals are beautiful. This, by the way, is butterfly weed, milkweed. That's a common favorite. You can see they have these really beautiful shooting star shaped flowers. That's all the milkweeds have a kind of similar flower, different colors though. But the monarchs will also bring us like other interesting, like I call them secrets. These are milkweed tussock moths. They also eat milkweed. They're also amazing, but I didn't know much about them until I followed the butterflies. And so the butterflies kind of like introduced me to these other animals. The monarchs also remind us that we're all connected. Some people want to take monarchs and like put them all in netting so that no predator can get to them. And they say that they're saving the monarchs. And we actually want the spiders and the ants and the wasps to eat most of the monarch eggs, because that's how we feed the food chain. So I think the monarch kind of teaches us about how important it is, not just for the monarchs to survive, but also for some of those eggs to die so that we can have birds and spiders and frogs. The monarchs also teach us, and this lesson is so important to me right now because I'm kind of making a transition here in my life for the next few years, is I found this frog on some milkweed. And so if I'm protecting frogs and I'm giving my yards to a frog, I'm also helping monarchs and vice versa. And I think it's a gift to know that. It's a gift to know that when you're helping one native plant or animal, you're really helping the whole system. And of course, the monarchs have given me so many friendships. This is Brianda. That's my bike in the background. She was one of the first people I met at the sanctuary. She was my guide. She invited me to stay at her house. That's where I live today, right now. And I'm so grateful for her friendship. And this Saturday, we're gonna make pizza. And the last, I think, gift that the monarchs give us is a reminder that small equals big. So here is what the monarchs look like at El Rosario. And you'll see that there's thousands clustered on this tree. And this tree, it's a small tree, but it's bent from the weight of butterflies. So if one butterfly can't bend a branch, but thousands can, well, we can extend that to ourselves. If one person can't save the monarchs, thousands can. If one garden can't save the monarchs, thousands can. So we have to remind ourselves when things seem impossible that it's only impossible if we all don't do a little. And so start, if you haven't already, getting a small something in your yard, a small little garden, some small milkweeds. Start, because that small start matters. And full disclosure, this is the first milkweed that I planted at my parents' house. It 1000% died. It's not easy, but it's possible to learn. And you all are sitting on a gold mine, which is a community that loves plants and native creatures. So lean on each other, learn from each other, and embrace the mistakes too, because that's where the stories are. My milkweed is doing much better, by the way. And I should mention here, this is my parents' house. My dad is he refuses to not have a perfectly manicured lawn, but now he has like probably a 20-foot by 2-foot milkweed, goldenrod, Joe Pye weed jungle in the back yard. So if he can change and see the importance of planting natives, then there's hope. And there's hope that the monarchs will keep on adventuring and come to you. Now, I just got to tell you one more thing, because I'm still on adventures with monarchs. And I'm going to fast forward really quick to say that I am currently working with 20 women in Mexico. I trained them to count monarchs that stream past their houses. And streaming is when the monarchs leave the colony and fly. It's a behavior that's never been studied before. And I have 20 women on the job counting monarchs, and I pay them for every count, and we have ways to measure the wind, and we use paper, which I'm currently entering data, and I already have about 700 data sheets, double-sided. But I'm really excited about this project, and I also have these thermometers at their houses. So I'm linking temperature information to the monarch behavior, and I can eventually, hopefully, understand if climate change is changing monarch behavior in the winter. So if you want to help me fund their paychecks, I've got a GoFundMe down here, and I'm just going to end it there because I've probably been talking too much. Thank you for being patient with me as well. If there's questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Sarah. Even having seen it once before, I was still fascinated. So bravo. And we'll absolutely take questions if you want to type something in the chat. I can read some, and then if people raise their hand, we could ask, you could vocalize your question too. Janet says, Sarah, you are truly an inspiration.
Thank you. Well, while people are thinking of questions, I skipped over some stuff to try and go a little faster. I should mention, while people think of their questions, that one cool fact about those milkweed tussock moths is that milkweed tussock moths, as an adult, are a nocturnal moth. So being bright orange would not warn predators. So the milkweed tussock moths also have actually evolved like a special organ that makes a clicking sound, and that clicking sound warns predators that they're toxic. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. So Jerry's asking, do you have to get a visa to work in Mexico?
So I have a tourist visa. You get 6 months. I'm not working, if anyone asks. I'm not getting paid, so it is all volunteer work. But if it was like a different, more official thing, then I think I would need to pursue that. But I'm just doing this because it's a fun excuse to walk around, and like every day I learn a new trail. So it's like it's fun to be able to like So my favorite thing is when I'll be on this trail and like no foreigner should ever be on this, just it would be it's a weird place for me to be, and I'll see someone riding their horse and they'll look at me like, what the heck are you doing here? And I'll just be like, hey. That always makes my day.
Sarah. Oh,
I heard someone speak.
yeah, yeah, it was Jane. But if somebody else has a question, that's fine.
Go ahead, Jane.
Okay, Sarah, thank you. That was such a good presentation. And I was just wondering what you have heard about, I know that there are people there that are cutting down the Oyamel fir trees that they stay on, that the monarchs stay on in Mexico. And have you heard anything about that? Have they been able to stop that?
The answer is complicated, and the land is divided up among all these. I don't know what I'd call them, but they're like communities, and so every community has kind of a different challenge and different relationship to the Oyamels and to the monarchs and to tourism and to opportunities that come from tourism. But certainly that is a huge threat, and it's a threat that I don't spend a lot of time talking about, because we could have a 100% perfect forest here, but if we don't have milkweed in the US, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think a bigger issue is the fact that the monarchs are at about 10,000 feet. The mountains go up to probably 12,000 feet. Eventually the climate, the belt where the Oyamels grow will get too warm. If they can kind of advance up the mountain with climate change, then we might be able to hold on for a little bit longer. But I think by 2090, it's projected that all the Oyamel fir habitat will be gone because of climate change. So I think when we're thinking about conservation, we have these short-term goals of protecting the forest for today's monarchs, but we really need to think about how we can stop climate change from causing irreversible damage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, Sarah, Jane and several others in our group are in charge of our annual native plant sale, and I think they said we have 6,000 ordered. So not all milkweed, but a very healthy mix, and this group is very sincere about their efforts as far as planting natives and going native. So Janet asked about donations being sent to help fund your work. I know you posted the GoFundMe. Is there another way to get donations?
That's the easiest, and that link was long and impossible, as we know links can be. I think if you Google GoFundMe Counting Monarchs, it'll get there, and it's also on my website, which is I could put in the chat.
Okay.
We'll put that in the next newsletter.
Awesome, thanks.
Okay. And yeah, Linda, this is true for those of us that have native gardens. She says, thank you for your interest and enthusiasm. Gives me courage to maintain my native garden in the face of lawn lover neighbors. So education is key. And then
it just is going to get easier and easier. Like you can read about someone's lawn, native garden replacing their lawn like almost every day. Like there's lots of cool examples happening, and yeah, stay strong. Buy them my book. That was a joke, but a sign actually goes a long way. If you don't have a sign, you can maybe buy one from Monarch Watch, and that helps a lot.
And speaking of Sarah's book, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to do that. I read it this past summer and basically immediately knew that Sarah would be a good speaker for our Wild Ones meeting. So Kathy, loved the emphasis on the importance of recognizing and respecting the interconnectedness of living things. Paul talked about, I just started a cold stratification on 200 to 300 butterfly milkweed seeds. he's offering them up this fall. Free seed from Paul, it sounds like, or maybe he'll charge us. I don't know. So,
Carol Soderheim had her hand up.
okay.
Hi, Sarah, I'm a little worried about you. All that traveling and on lonely roads all by yourself. Are you ever worried about yourself? I mean, you're so brave and the world is so dicey. Do you
I've bicycled about 80,000 miles, probably at least 20,000 of that has been in Latin America. 20 more thousand has been in the US bike touring, and I've had very, very, very few sketchy moments. I think the key is that I'm a white woman. I think if you're going to travel, the safest way to travel is to be a white woman. People take you in, they assume the best in you. They also want to protect you. So I get a lot of invitations from that. I slept behind a lot of churches, in a lot of maybe not 100% legal places. And I often thought that it would be a very different, much scarier story if I say it was a Black man. So I think my safety comes from actually being a white woman. I think that is the safest way to travel.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Mark and Jerry, this is Paul.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Somebody said, what is he gonna charge? If I have success with all these little seeds and I'm able to grow the plugs, there is no charge. Just call me, and there's a lot of seeds. Every pod has, I don't know, maybe 100 seeds in it, I think, but they're a beautiful plant.
We'll work something out, Paul.
Good. Thanks, Jeff.
Are there any other questions?
Sarah, if you had a whole acre, would you plant a pollinator garden or would you plant all milkweed?
I would certainly plant both. We need both. We need as much diversity out there as we can. And of course, depending on where you live, where that acre was, like in the fall in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas even, like the most important thing is not milkweed, but nectar plants, because the monarchs will spend the fall flying south, but also trying to get as fat as possible. And they'll just nectar and nectar and nectar, trying to get enough fat reserves that they can arrive in Mexico and survive. So right now they're living off of the nectar that they drank in Texas. So if it was just milkweed, yes, there are fall blooming milkweeds, but having as much diversity, not just of species, but that diversity also make sure that there's flowers blooming all season for all the other pollinators and all the other animals that have different host plants.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Sarah, I was wondering, do you have any favorite flowers for them to nectar off of, or what would you suggest as some of your very favorites?
Oh, my favorite is goldenrod, and there's a lot of species of goldenrod, but I adore that plant. Like they feel like a friend. I'm like, oh, hey. And my favorite line in my book, that when I gave it to the publisher, my book, I said, okay, I'm ready to take all the criticism in the world, but I refuse to change this one sentence. And the sentence was, I've never met a lonely goldenrod. And I just love them. And they're fall blooming, and they're just wonderful. But because I was traveling so much, like it was hard to learn specific species as I went. But what was cool on my motorcycle trip this fall, I connected to a lot more Native Plant Society folks. And so I did a lot more like investigating native plants. And I think this fall, my favorite was that people called it different names, but a lot of people called this plant boneset. And it's like white flowers, and the monarchs really, really love them.
Oh, good. Thank you. And we do have some bone set coming in our plant sale.
Oh, nice.
So do you have any other books in the future?
I'm on my third pass of a version of this book for 10-year-olds. And I've got out some letters one letter to an agent, and if they don't reply in 6 weeks, I'll send it out to the next agent. When I started my trip, my only purpose was to talk to basically like 3rd to 8th graders. Those are my favorite audiences. But I started writing this book and I was like, nah, I'm too angry to write to a 10-year-old. But with time, and it's such a relief to articulate your feelings, and it's easier to hold on to them or let them go, or both. So now I'm writing a book for 10-year-olds that I'm pretty excited about.
Maybe we'll see one about frogs soon too, huh?
I hope so. That would be amazing.
Well, Linda asked, what are your future travel plans?
Oh, that question hurts my heart. I've committed to this job in California for 2 years, and I'm gonna start planning a frog trip for after that, with the intention to make it an amphibious trip that's half land, half water, and each little section of trip, like maybe a canoe trip, and then maybe a biking trip, and then a hiking trip, and then a sailing trip, all focuses on a different species and a frog in a different spot. So I'm still thinking about it.
Sounds exciting.
Well, Sarah, we really, first of all, apologize for the delay.
Me too.
22 people, I guess that includes you, who were on tonight. And that's about normal for our Zoom meetings. And we appreciate you zooming in all the way from Mexico. Talk to us
Yes.
tonight. It is miserable weather here, so I hope it's wonderful there.
Well, I'm in my down jacket right now, so it's cold, but nice. Yeah, thank you as well, and sorry for the
Well,
distractions.
we
I wish I could multitask as well as some, but yeah, it was fun. It's always a pleasure.
How could we reach you? Do you have a blog or?
Yeah, I threw my website in the chat. It's beyondabook.org, and then my email is just my name @gmail.
Thank you. And was this session recorded? I'd like my granddaughter to see it.
Yes, it's been recorded and it'll be posted on our website in a few days.
Thank you, Jerry.
Sarah, I don't see your blog post.
Oh, I just put in the chat it says you to everyone, www.beyondabook.org.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed it.
I think it's there, but if not, you can Google me.
It's there, Mark. It's one of the first chats way back towards the beginning. Thank you,
Okay.
Sarah. Great job.
Thank you. Good luck with the plant sale, and keep up the good work.
And
Sarah.
everybody, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. This was a good night to do a Zoom meeting because the roads are getting really icy, and drive safely in the next few days.